Okay. We still got a couple more minutes. I have one more.
You're supposed to be here Monday. But still, that leaves lots. His two lots are the two on the water. David was telling me about it. I think he understood.
Well, one is.
Talk about it.
But then we would
All right.
have that whole.
Go ahead and we'll call this special call work session on the, oh, I lost it. The ARPA funding to where I'd like to ask everyone to please stand. Mr. Brown, if you'd lead us in invocation. Ms. Wright, will you lead us in the pledge of the flag?
Pray with me, please. Heavenly Father, once again we come to you with grateful hearts. Thank you for the opportunity to meet here as a body to do business in the city of Kingston. Be with us as we go through these deliberations and we do the best that we can for our citizens. And we give you praise every day for your Son who died for us on the cross. In his name we pray. Amen.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. I'm going to just turn it over to Mr. Bowling and let him go ahead and we'll get started with everything.
Thank you, Mayor. It's appreciate everybody being here. It's not often we see you guys during business hours in a meeting, so it's nice to not have to be here at night. So we appreciate that. Wanted to, and first of all, want to introduce, you all know, and we'll let them introduce themselves in a minute, but you know Evan Sanders with Community Development Partners, and Mike McAdoe with Fulgham McAdoe is here as well, and we appreciate you guys being here. You know, this process, as we thought all along, is it took forever for anything to develop, and then now things are starting to move full speed ahead, and that's kind of how we envisioned it going. And we thought it was a good time to get together. We know no decisions are going to be made today. We're not going to walk out of here with a final plan, but maybe we'll at least walk out of here with more information than we came with, and having some idea of where we might be wanting to go. So, if we can accomplish those things, I think this is it'll be a successful effort, and this will no doubt be the first of, or I guess the second of many conversations about this. As we talk today, and Evan in a minute is going to give you kind of an overview of where things stand and the final ruling and things like that. But I want to kind of get your mind around how we need to be looking at this, and really as we're talking about ARPA funding, talking about two pots of money, potentially three. First of all, of course, we have the direct appropriation, which was $1.77 million. We already have half of that. We'll get the other half next year. And as you'll hear in a minute, really there aren't many limitations at all on that money now. Originally, there were very specific things that it could be used for. Now, because of the different way they're looking at lost revenue, we can just about do whatever we want to do with that pot of money. The second is the state. As you know, the state appropriated $1.9 million for us as a non-competitive matching grant, and that money, which is being overseen by TDEC, is utility specific. So, and it also has a 25% match, which would be about a little under $275,000. We can use our direct appropriation for that, but that money will be coming as well. And again, that's utility specific. So, we know what we can use that money for, and we'll be talking more about that process in a bit. The third pot of money, which most of you have probably heard about, we have all heard about, talked about, is county funding. And there's a lot of conversations going in different directions. I know they had a meeting the other night. There is no consensus. There is nothing finalized, but it looks like there is a good chance that we'll be eligible for some county money. I do know that we have, and I think you have a copy of it, we put together at the county executive's request a resolution which basically says that, if the county decides to distribute their TDEC utility money to the cities, that we're going to match our TDEC money as well. Their thought is if they invest in local utility projects, they want to make sure we're willing to put skin in the game as well. So, again, nothing's finalized about that, and we're kind of in a holding pattern to see. But obviously, not speaking for council, but I'm sure that we'll be putting up the match for the TDEC money. We're not going to lose free money. So. We'll see where that goes, but those are kind of the pots of money that we're working on. I think also there's some talk about the county divvying out some of their direct appropriation money for city projects. Again, that's something county commission is going to have to decide on. So thinking that that's kind of floating out there with a question mark beside it. Right now, as of today, the certainty is our direct appropriation and the non-competitive matching grant funds that we know have been allocated for us. So as we talk today about directions we want to go with some of this, just kind of keep that in mind. And with that, you have the agenda in front of you. I was going to have Evan introduce himself first. Again, Evan, you've met with him before, but let him give you an introduction for those of you that don't know him, and kind of give you an overview of the scope of services that Community Development Partners will be providing with us.
Before that, the third pot of money from the county, any idea how much that could be, or?
We have some tentative numbers that the county executive has given us, but
How much are they getting total, do you know?
a little over $5 million, I think.
Yeah, I think somewhere in there.
So we could get part of 5 million.
Yeah.
All right.
There is a number that's been thrown out there, but again, you have 16 county commissioners. They're going to have to vote to appropriate anything, and it's an election year, so who knows what's going to happen with that. But
Thank you.
with that, Evan, I'll let you have the floor.
Absolutely.
Hey, Evan, one thing, would you make sure you and Mike have your microphones on?
And that's in here, David, I apologize, that handout that just gave us, my questions are on that, thank you.
So, I'm Evan Sanders, Community Development Partners. Know most all of you, worked on a number of projects here over the years. But for those that may not know me, just a little bit about myself and my company. We are an administrative grant management firm. I started the company back in 1994, so we're April 1st, 1994, so we're about to hit our 28th year of business. We cover statewide in Tennessee, a little bit in Mississippi. My primary work is over here on the eastern side of the state. Grew up in Knoxville, so I kind of gravitate towards this area. And David and I have worked together for I'm not sure how many years, but it's been a lot.
Going back.
20 some odd years probably, it seems. And just a little bit of how we operate. We normally go out and assist communities in putting together financial packages to seek grant and/or loan funding for various community development projects. Could be water, wastewater, could be fire protection, could be parks and recreation, TDOT funding, so on and so forth. So we normally come in, put applications together on a community's behalf. We do that at no cost. And then once the funding's secured, we actually come in and then contract for our primary role, which is to help communities navigate and implement the funding that's been received, making sure that all the state and/or federal compliance and regulatory requirements are being hit and fulfilled. So that's our primary role, is to work on behalf of the city to help get through the navigation and management of the regulatory compliance involved and the oversight of the funding, and that would be whether it be community development block grant funds, which we've done in the past here, which are federal funds, local park recreation funds, which are state funds. So that's our primary role involved. We work with whatever engineers are involved on a particular project that the community brings in. I've done a considerable amount of work with Mike on projects over the years as well. So very familiar with his company and their services. So these ARPA dollars really are no different from a lot of the compliance requirements. And I'll get into that a little more after Mike. I think you've got me down to kind of really dive into the details a little bit. But these ARPA funds will be no different. Our intent is, and what we've been contracted for, is to help Kingston navigate and implement those funds. What will be both on the direct allocation of funds and on the TDEC allocation of funds, the state ARPA funds. So that's what we're prepared to assist with. And I'll, in a few minutes, I'll kind of dive into that a little deeper on kind of what the opportunities. David mentioned that there's been some changes with the funding. These are, one thing that I will point out before, and then I'll let Mike do his introduction. One of the primary differences that I see with these ARPA funds versus the other funds that we normally, other federal or state funds we normally help a community to implement, is if we're doing a CDBG project or an LPRF project, we've got a funding agency to coordinate with. In other words, each step of the process of what a community or what we're helping a community do, we're communicating and coordinating with the funding agency. So for example, on a CDBG project, when we had the wastewater plant project here, with CDBG funds, we bid the project, I gathered all the information, bid information up, I sent it in to the CDBG agency, and they had to review it and approve it to approve us to the next phase of things. Well, these ARPA funds, Department of Treasury has basically given you all the funds and said, here's the booklet, follow it. We don't have an agency to gather the information, send it to them, have them check it off, us be able to have something in the file saying, okay, they've agreed to it, we've agreed to it. They expect the communities to do that on their own. So that's our role, is to make sure that, we're going to treat this no differently. If we're bidding out a project, we're going to gather all that same information that the federal programs require. We'll have our own checks and balances with that. We'll make sure that it's all documented in the files, all the appropriate approvals by the council. And matter of fact, I brought the files today. And so that at the end of the day, when either Treasury comes out and or your audits come out, because a single audit will be required on these, you all have got the documentation. If they say, okay, we need to see your blank and blank procurement, boom, here it is. So that's one of our primary roles in this, and that's one of the considerable differences I see with this funding versus what we normally do. Is Treasury basically has kind of turned it loose, but they want you all to make sure you're hitting the federal guidelines that need to be hit. So that's all I've got, at least at this stage, and then we'll dive into the details in a minute.
Thank you, Evan. And Evan's right. We've worked together on grant projects going back years and have had nothing but good service. And, if you've ever been involved, any of you, on anything that involves federal funding, any big grant projects, what a regulatory nightmare they can be. And having, we have our, limitations at the staff level just because we don't have the manpower to dedicate to things like this exclusively. So having community development partners on our team throughout this is going to be very, very advantageous to us. So we're thrilled to have you. Next, I'm going to let Mike McIndoe introduce himself, but somebody new to Kingston that we haven't used before. But as you know, responded to our RFQ that we sent out, and we're really thrilled to have you here. So
Yep.
I'll give you the floor
Good.
and let you introduce yourself.
All right, David. Thanks so much. As David indicated, I'm Mike McIndoe with Fulgham McIndoe & Associates. So I'm one of the partners in the firm. I've been practicing engineering since 1985. I'm a 1984 grad from Tennessee Tech. My business partner and I got introduced to each other, gosh, I guess in 1988 when we were working together with a local consultant in Knoxville, and kind of joked around about how cool it would be to start a firm. Well, some X amount of years later, we jumped off the cliff and decided to do that. And we started our company in 2003. It's been a great ride for us. Since that time period, we've grown to a firm of about 25 people. We're a multidiscipline firm, so we provide water, wastewater services, which is what I do, and natural gas, general civil site design, anything related to developments, residential, commercial, industrial, education, things of that nature, structural, electrical, power distribution. So we touch on a little bit of everything. We don't do surveying. We partner with a lot of different surveyors to get that done. We don't do any big transportation projects, any TDOT work. We've never really put that on our radar before, but again, we touch on a lot of different things. We've been working in the area for a lot of communities, some big folks, and then again, our bread and butter, quite honestly, are towns like Kingston. That's kind of where we seem to thrive and where we seem to develop our best and longest term relationships with folks, is working with folks like Kingston. So we're excited about the opportunity to come in and work for y'all. Really excited. The staff's excited. Looking forward to work on this project and hopefully projects thereafter. Evan mentioned our firms have partnered before, and I guess that, probably started around 2005. I've not counted up how many communities we're working with each other, but it's a bunch. There's several, and again, cover the full spectrum of the different grant programs. So we're really familiar with the different programs that are out there, and from the things that we've done with Evan and out and beyond that. So our, what do we do? Again, we'll do the technical element of the project. So we'll be working with Evan, David, and Kevin as we define the scope, kind of define what the scope of the work is, pulling together the pricing, from our experience with other types of similar projects. So we'll help you develop all those preliminary probable cost on the project, and we'll supply Evan with the information he needs for this ARPA, these applications and the requests that are submitted for the project. So that'll be our role on the project, and again, working with David and Kevin as those scopes are defined.
Thank you, Mike. And I'll often say with my department heads, my management style is to surround myself with people who are smarter than I am and let them do their jobs. So we have two more to add to that list, and thrilled to have both of you here. As Evan said, I've got here, as you'll see on the agenda, let him kind of dive deeper to give you an update on the final ruling, talk about some of the permitted uses. As you all know, this has evolved a lot since this first was passed by Congress, and we've had interim final rules and final rules and final rules. So we think we're finally at a point where we know how this is going to look, so and what some of those changes were. So Evan, with that, I'll let you dive deeper, and I think this will be really beneficial for all of us once we get to the point we start thinking about where we want to go with this money. So.
Absolutely. Okay. And I know David's got in the agenda packet kind of a breakdown of things, and I think this is good to kind of just begin to go over big picture and then dive kind of into the details of everything. But of course, with the American Rescue Plan Act funding, ARPA, as I think we all call it at this point in time, every city, every county, every state was given a direct allocation of funds. In your all's case, it was 1.77 million. That you've already got 50% of that in the bank. You'll get the additional 50% sometime later this year, you're eligible to start spending it now. My understanding that no money has been spent yet, which is a good thing. Puts you on a good position to kind of begin to head down a pathway of spending it how you best need to use it. And also, obviously, making sure we're hitting the requirements of the funding program involved. As David mentioned, there have been some considerable changes. When the initial funding was released, Department of Treasury, where these funds are coming from, issued an interim rule detailing the requirements and expectations for the funds. And in that interim rule were certain eligibility criteria that each community, each recipient of the funds had to adhere to as far as spending that money. And quite openly, those eligibility requirements were pretty limiting. There wasn't a lot of it's pretty directed use, is I guess the best way of putting it. There were some public health and safety, as long as it related to COVID impact. There was premium pay related to COVID impact. Water, wastewater, broadband, but again, some eligibility limitations within water, wastewater, and broadband. So, there were some challenges in communities that felt like, hey, we've got some real specific needs that we've been needing to address and hadn't had the money to over the years, but we don't see that we're going to be able to do that. Whereas some communities are like, we're going to do this, and we'd have to say, yeah, that's probably not a great idea. Because we've had a lot of those discussions. Short and long of it, Department of Treasury issued their final rule a little over a month ago. And it took them a lot longer. Originally, I think they said the final rule would be out in September 10th specifically. And, September rolled around, October, November, December, January, still no final rule. Everybody's kind of, anxious to start moving ahead with these funds. I think what took so long is they made some pretty significant changes that had to get through Congress. And the most significant change is within the interim rule, there was one eligibility category for revenue loss. And but in order to claim revenue loss, a community had to go through an exercise, financial exercise, on their database to demonstrate the amount of revenue that was lost throughout the pandemic. And if a community was able to demonstrate, well, we've lost $1 million, then that $1 million could be utilized by that community for government services. So the big change, and the difficulty with that is, some communities had a little revenue loss, some had no revenue loss, some had it was kind of a hit and miss thing. The big change with the final rule is that they evaluated nationally all the communities and created an average of what revenue loss was nationwide. And they are now, with the final rule, basically providing an option to take an allowance of up to $10 million and put it towards the eligibility criteria of revenue loss. Now, it doesn't mean you're getting $10 million, but that means your entire allocation of $1.77 million, we could check that box, revenue loss. And probably will check that box, and I'll get into that in a couple of minutes. Now, what that does is, once you check that box for revenue loss, if that's the direction you're going to move with your $1.77 million, the requirement is you can't just take that money and do what you want with it per se, put it in the bank and stockpile it. It has to be spent, and it has to be spent on government services. So that's, as David alluded to, that's what's really kind of cracked things wide open, to where you can now use those funds and they recommend using those funds on things that are related to government services.
Expand on that government services a
well,
little bit more.
It's,
I mean,
it's
does putting a sidewalk in considered government service?
capital projects can be government service,
Okay.
yes.
That's,
You know, so under the original revenue loss rules, it was a little more restrictive on government services. Really, about the only thing you can't do with this is you can't go in and pad pensions. Pretty obvious. So government services is pretty wide open. Treasury had a webinar on Monday, and they are strongly encouraging communities to take that option first, because it does kind of provide a better umbrella for protection on what you use the funds for. It lessens a little bit of the reporting requirements. There's annual reporting involved on all of this. And so regardless of what it is, even if you quite frankly, even if we're doing a water wastewater project with your direct funding, and water wastewater, there is an eligibility criteria for water wastewater that we could check. We're probably still going to check the box for revenue loss and do the water wastewater under the umbrella of revenue loss, which is, again, that's been encouraged by Treasury at this point in time. So that's kind of the most significant change out there, that allows communities to then step back and consider projects that they might not have been considering on the front end, when the initial funding came out and everything was operating under the interim rule. So that's the most significant change. And you know, again, my recommendation, and this is, we've been meeting on this internally as a company, you know, and consulting, obviously, looking, you know, going through the webinars and consulting with state leaders and whatnot, is, you know, we'll recommend we take that revenue loss regardless of what we do. You know, even if 90% of it goes to water wastewater projects, we're still going to put that under the umbrella of revenue loss. Any questions on that? Okay, and I'm sure we'll dive into maybe some more specifics on
Yeah.
that. So that's your direct allocation of funding.
so can the direct allocation for funding go as part of the match for the other two?
Yes.
Okay.
So, and let me dive into the TDEC side of things. So your direct 1.77, that's what we've been discussing, and that's where the change with the revenue loss. The state of Tennessee, of course, they were issued ARPA monies as well to the tune of about $3.8 billion or something like that, in that ballpark. The state is taking a $1 billion of that funding and are providing it to counties and municipalities that own their water wastewater systems. And that $1 billion is going to be considered a non-competitive grant to counties and to cities with water wastewater specific projects. So these funds will not be revenue loss related projects. These funds will specifically be water wastewater and or stormwater projects. The Kingston TDEC allocation, because they have a certain allocation for each municipality that has a water wastewater system, and then they've given counties allocations. The city allocation that's available is 1,091,202 roughly. The county, Rome County allocations 5,316,000 roughly. There is a match requirement on both city and county funds. 25%, I believe, is the current match for those. It was originally 30%, and the state, quite honestly, when Treasury came out with the final rule and geared things towards revenue loss. The state reduced the match 5% because they were really encouraging communities to use their direct allocation of funding to match the TDEC funding. They were trying to encourage communities to use their direct money on water, wastewater, but once those reins got loosened up a little bit, the state pulled back on the match requirements and reduced things 5% across the board to everybody. One of the major differences with the TDEC money is it's not money that's just going to be dropped in your account like Treasury did, put 50% in now, 50% later. Those are funds that have to be applied for. So there will be an application phase for the TDEC funding that will probably start up sometime in April and run all the way through November 1st. TDEC has just within the last 2 weeks ago today, they released their grant manual for the funding, and they are now working on their application, which they hope to have out probably by end of this month, early April. They're starting a battery of workshops on their funding in April, first one being April 4th in Cookeville. Matter of fact, I'll be at that one. And they'll have workshops through, I think, the 18th or 19th of April. Then they'll start receiving applications. To your point, Mayor, the matching funds can most definitely come out of the city's direct allocation of funding, out of your 1.77. That was the intent of putting that matching requirement in there to begin with, and so they're sticking to that. So a little bit on the TDEC funding. It is kind of guided funding in that it's their funds, so they're kind of directing where those funds go, what sort of projects they go for. So they've had every utility anticipates on being part of an application to complete what's called an infrastructure scorecard, which is they've always had the scorecards, but they've kind of refined the scorecard for this particular process. And those scorecards detail at the end of the day, and it's not just a small process. I mean, there's a lot of system data, flow data, financial audit data, a lot that goes into the scorecard process. I don't know how long it took y'all, but I've been hearing 4 or 5 hours minimum in many cases to complete the scorecard, and so it's a pretty involved process. And at the end of the day, that scorecard, the summary of that provides a detail of what potential critical need areas are within your systems. And the requirement with TDEC is with their money, in this case almost 1.1 million that the city's eligible for, you have to be addressing first and foremost scorecard critical need areas. Now, in your all's case, I don't see that as any problems from talking about the projects that we've been talking about doing. Seem to fall in line with the results of the scorecard. One of the things the state has been really encouraging over the last couple of years is asset management planning. So far, I think out of all the utilities across the state that I've seen scorecards from, I've only seen one that's not had something flagged on asset management. I think you all had some minimal flags there that would need to be addressed as part of the TDEC application. But overall, I think we'll be able to accomplish pretty much most of what you all would be looking at from infrastructure-related needs. Those applications, as I mentioned, will probably start up in April, run through November. One distinction on the application process is they've broken the applications into 2 phases. So the initial applications that can go in are considered phase 1, and the state is only accepting phase 1 applications for collaborative projects. Then 60 to 90 days later, they will open phase 2 for more independent projects. Doesn't mean that there's any funding more or less being in one phase or the other. You all are still have available to you the 1.1-ish million dollars of TDEC money. It just means at what time would you be able to go after and apply for it. Collaborative is first and foremost when two or more entities are working together. More specifically, and this is a change they've had recently at TDEC, there has to be a financial interest of both parties. So in other words, if the county, which there is an intent there, my understanding of the county working with the utilities within their community to provide some of the county $5.3 million, that begins to get into a collaboration. If the county's saying, hey, we're going to take blank amount and we're going to provide that to Kingston, and Kingston gets to combine it with the money that you all would be requesting from TDEC, there's your collaboration. Now, the minimum requirement is each partner has to be putting in 15%. I really don't see that as an issue here because, I think the county's offering a decent amount last I heard. That's all subject to change, and I guess what the commission ultimately decides upon. But that may allow you all to be an applicant in phase one. But truthfully, the phase one applications roll all the way through November 1st. So there's no panic to say, my gosh, they're going to open this thing up in April. We got to get something in right now. Now, if you can take your time, you can make sure you get things right with the county. You can make sure you're getting things right with what projects you're wanting to present to TDEC. Really, and that's what, Mike and my role is to help, you all, David and Kevin, how, manage and, piece everything together for the application. So certainly you don't want to just rush into it. You want to make sure you're trying to take full advantage with the applications. One thing I will say on these applications that's a very distinct difference from what we normally see. Normally we do CDBG, we do LPRF or something, TDOT, whatever. We send an application in, the state reviews it, and in some cases score it out. They come back and they either give you a yay or a nay. These are not like that. You've got available to you $1.1 million. The state wants you to have that money. They're kind of channeling how those funds are going to be spent. But, if for some reason an application goes in and they think, hey, we really feel it's better geared towards this or that, there'll be that potential for back and forth. It's not just you get something in and they're going to say yay or nay on it. So that is one distinct difference. At the end of the day, out of that $1 billion, they are going to accept applications. Does everybody apply? Does everybody apply for the full amount? We've heard situations where cities and counties may not go for the full amount. They may not go for any amount for whatever reason, match requirements, depreciation requirements, which are definitely have to be considered. They're trying to get all these applications in by November, figured out by the end of the year, so they can collect whatever money of that $1 billion is not applied for or not approved, whatever, and they will pool that money and roll it into a competitive grant program that will roll out sometime in 2023. We don't know much at all at this point about the competitive program, but obviously we're keeping an eye on that. There's the potential that those will be kind of for regionalistic type projects. We don't know that. There may be kind of different phases of those as well. So that's kind of it in a pretty large nutshell. So I'm happy to answer questions or.
And as we do that, just want to touch on a couple things. First of all, Evan made a really good point just now, mentioning the dreaded D word, depreciation. And as you all know, we're now required to show depreciation as an expense. That prompted the rate study that we had to do. That prompted the rate increases that were mandated on us. And so one of the things, the feedback we're getting from the state is, absolutely be prepared to account for the depreciation of all this work you're doing, and that it will be on us to make sure that our revenue is sufficient to cover any increases in depreciation. So, yes, we're getting free money to do all these projects, but we are going to have to make sure that our rate structure covers whatever the increase to that depreciation is. Another thing, going back to the county, and again, nothing's decided, being finalized yet. The latest I got as of, I guess, yesterday or day before was the thought is that the county, as far as their TDEC money, the $5.3 million, as they allocate that out for collaborative projects, that the county is going to fund their match for that money, which I would assume they're going to do out of their direct appropriation as well. So basically, they would fund the match of it. They've got this pot of money, and they say, okay, Kingston is doing this. We're going to kick in. We see a benefit. We're going to kick in. We're going to contribute $1 million of our money or whatever to that. So again, that could be how that works. We'll still wait to see. In terms of the 1.1 million we're getting, I think Evan makes a good point that we don't have to rush. There's some fear, and I've heard this from some other cities that, we got to get something in quick or we're going to lose out or whatever. There's no losing out. We have that money. That money is dedicated. We don't have it in-house, but it's dedicated to us. So, we have to meet the application deadline, but there's nothing that has to be done in April. So I think definitely best that we take our time and make informed decisions. One of the things, and I'll go ahead and jump into this, Evan mentioned the infrastructure scorecard. This was something that TDEC and TAUD partnered on to fit this ARPA project, and it's something that we put some work into, knowing in advance that it was going to throw up red flags. And basically, what TDEC's going to say is, okay, we're going to give you this $1.1 million to meet your needs, your infrastructure needs, but you're going to take care of these things first. We were lucky when we got, and the results of our infrastructure scorecard are in your packets, but we were very lucky that we didn't have a lot of red flags pop up. So that's a good thing, and that's a testament to the job that you all do in addressing these needs, and that Kevin and his guys do run this utility. But things like I&I, we didn't get red flagged there. We didn't get red flagged with our line loss. Kind of that low hanging fruit, as Evan mentioned, asset management. They're going to want us to do an asset management plan, and that's something that a formal plan that no one short of the large utilities has. So we know we're going to have to do that. The other red flag we got, which we were expecting, is where we really planned on directing those funds, was aging infrastructure. So that kind of fit, even though that's their priority, that kind of fit where we're going. We thought we would go with this. And that's a pretty broad umbrella as well, because everything we have is just about as old. So that's going to give us a lot of flexibility there to start identifying some of those needs. And then I think once you get beyond, because this money doesn't have to be for one specific project or two specific projects. And I don't even think, and Evan, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you can even have multiple applications, if I'm not mistaken, or you can amend it.
The city would ultimately have one application, but within that application, you could have a number of different projects under that umbrella.
So if we had, if we knew, okay, we're going to replace this water line, we're going to cure and place these sewer lines, whatever, we're going to do our asset management plan. to meet those requirements. Beyond that, if we wanted to, put in new water meters or do, whatever, we can include that. So, we get the reins come off of us a lot more after we've identified the red flag issues that they've raised. So we had Mike come in, several weeks ago, spend a day with Kevin, going out, looking at our system, getting familiar. And I know Kevin certainly has no shortage of ways that we can direct this money. But again, I think we have a lot of flexibility. The match, we know we can fund out of the direct appropriation. We add that to the TDEC money if we get county money on top of that. So we could be able to make a real dent in some of our existing infrastructure problems, which is the intent of this whole thing. So, that's a real positive. And again, we don't have to decide what those projects are going to be today, but knowing that, we're going to have infrastructure money and we're going to have the ability to do some other stuff that we originally didn't think we were going to be able to do. So.
Okay. So, and first when it came out, they gave a deadline of how long you had till this date the money has to be spent. So is that kind of still there, or is it gone away?
Yes,
or?
the deadlines are unchanged at this point. The original deadlines are still were not changed with the final rule. So the requirements are that you all have to have all the funds, your city direct allocation of funding, and quite frankly, the TDEC, they're under the same requirements. All funds have to be obligated by December 31st of 2024, and then they have to be spent by December 31st of 2026.
Okay. So
That's where things stand now. Now, does that change? Who knows? I think as everybody probably realizes, every city, every county, every state is getting money, and it's all going to be out there at one time. Where's all the material going to come
exactly.
from?
Where's all the
labor
contractors
gonna
coming
come
from? Right. Now that is going to be, we have
Yeah.
a supply chain issue now, so
Supply-
that's going to look like when.
already before this is hitting, and there's issues. So everybody will be in the same boat. And if things begin to get delayed because of that, does Treasury have to back up and start looking at extensions? Maybe so. But right now, we're under the 2024 and 2026 is what we're working with.
Evan, give them a little overview. Obviously, we know with the TDEC money, there's going to be an application process, and we'll go through that. But give them a little oversight of how the direct appropriation money how it gets spent, and with the spending plan and various.
So your direct allocation, the 1.77 million. Of course, they've turned 50% of that money over to you all. You've got it in the bank. They've given you the guidelines now of how that money can be spent. You can start spending that money. You can go back and reimburse for projects potentially or needs that may have happened post March 3rd of 2021 is eligible. However, there are some steps in the process that you want and need to take to make sure when you're identifying projects, even under revenue loss, because just taking the revenue loss umbrella, yes, you get to spend things on government services, but you still have to document what you're spending those funds on. And that's part of our role involved is to help with that documentation and the requirements in spending that money. The best way I have been putting it is, being able to take the revenue loss angle is really just an eligibility checkbox. This is how we're going to the eligibility umbrella that we're going to be under for the various projects. Then you still have to follow the requirements on how you spend that money. You can't just kind of go out and do projects without following the federal criteria. At least at this point, that's how they're rules and requirements are set up. So, some of the things that steps you can take, there is, David mentioned a spending plan. The state of Tennessee is providing a service as part of their involvement and, not necessarily oversight, but just kind of their educational process with these funds, that each community can submit a spending plan to the state that details, the money you're getting, your proposed uses, the eligibility that you plan on utilizing. And it's not something that puts any liability on the state. Matter of fact, they've been very clear to say that, they'll review these, they'll provide feedback on the spending plans, but at the end of the day, the liability is between the city of Kingston and the Department of Treasury. Still, it's a good, useful tool, I think, to have that within, within your files, the files that we end up keeping, to show that you all took every step available out there to assure compliance with eligibility. Now, it's changed a lot with the revenue loss. The spending plan itself has changed in many fashions, but it's something we can still do, and that can be an annual process. I mean, they're taking kind of the first round of those through March 31st of this year. And they'll probably, in talking to the state's consultants, which the Horn Group, who is helping the state navigate from their side of things, all these funds, it's very possible that they will open the spending plan process up a little later this year. That's probably when we best hit. Once you begin to identify projects and you begin to know what they are, we will eventually get them on a spending plan so that we've had it into the state and they've provided us with some feedback.
And I think you're right that once the final ruling opened up this lost revenue door, the spending plan, the focus on that changed a lot. One of the things the state said all along, and Evan alluded to this, is they're not going to tell us, they weren't going to tell us on the front end, this doesn't, you can't spend it on this, you can't spend it on that. They might recommend you don't, but what was going to happen was on the back end, when this is audited, you could face the possibility that they could come in and say, you misspent these funds, you're going to have to reimburse us this money. Now that we have that umbrella of lost revenue, that fear has subsided greatly. Like you said, that's still a good tool, but basically the process for the direct appropriation would be, if we decide, okay, we want to spend $150,000 on X, we document that. We go in, I guess, through the portal, document that expenditure, and we spend the money. And it's of course audited later. So that helps. One of the things we're going to do, we're looking at this internally, is the same way that we've addressed TVA enhancement funds in the past, bond issue funds, whatever, is that none of this funding is going to be appropriated without council approval. So I want to say that on the front end, so there's no thought that we're just going to be spending this on whatever we want to spend it on. It's going to come from you guys. So I think that adds a layer of accountability and transparency on anything we do. But like Evan said, we now have, with that pot of money, very little restriction on what it can be spent on. It could be spent on things that we could reimburse ourselves for things we've already done. We could spend, things we planned on spending out of our fund balance or whatever. We have that pot of money. So
now that's wide open from what it was
it's
originally.
pretty much wide open.
And I'd like to add to that a little bit, if that's all right. Kind of some of the things we've been talking about internally. As David's right, our recommendation is once plans begin to develop for various projects, that either there be formal authorization by the full board in the form of a resolution or something like that, either individually by project, or if you've got a group of projects that you know you're ready to move forward on or whatnot, that's definitely something that we recommend as well, is some formal action on that for record keeping purposes. Beyond that piece, we also, it's a transparency piece. Your citizens realize that you all are getting, close to $1.8 million. Our intent is, as projects begin to come together, we will develop kind of a planning document per se, of each use of funds, the need for that use, kind of the need, the use, the results. So at the end of the day, you all have got something that if somebody says, hey, what'd you do with this money? Boom, we've got a document that clearly outlines what the city of Kingston utilized the funding for. As David mentioned, you can go back and pay things. I mean, government services is wide open. And, I've heard a few communities, public safety payroll, going in and using these funds for payroll, and then essentially using the money you're saving from payroll on something else. Well, to me, and this is my perspective on these funds, and this gets back to kind of what I was talking to on the plain document, you've been given, $1.8 million. In my book, in opinion, you want to be able to say, hey, here's what we did with it. We got something to show for it. We didn't just go kind of scoop it up into other things that we could legally, technically do. We've got something we did for our citizens, and here's what we did. So that's kind of my soapbox a little bit on that perspective. Obviously, your all's decisions. But I think it's important that at the end of the day, you have something that, with federal scrutiny and thoughts on, it's a lot of money across the country. You really want to be able to show and represent that, hey, we put some serious consideration into what we did with this. We made some good decisions, and here, Kingston residents, here's what we did for y'all with these funds.
Right, and we do that all the time with what we just, the money we just borrowed. So, I mean, like, the first thing we would have to do is have a resolution to be able to take the money for the matches out.
Yeah, and we have basically what the resolution you're going to have before you in April just states that we intend to use part of our money to fund the TDEC match, which again, obviously that's something you got to approve, but that's a no-brainer. We're not going to let that money go. One of the things that I'll kind of expand on what Evan said, and again, this is just soapbox. I mean, whatever this money's spent on, either pot is ultimately up to you guys. But I would urge you as you look, particularly with the direct appropriation money, which is the kind of the blank canvas. And I know, 7 people are going to have 7 different ideas on what that money can be spent on. Just keep in mind that we really need to spend that on one-time items, one-time issues, not anything reoccurring. Because we have this pot of money, but it's a one-time pot. When it's gone, if it's something's going to be reoccurring cost, we're going to be on the hook for that. So again, that's just me on my soapbox. Before we get into you guys starting to talk about some of your ideas, I was going to take just a minute and let Kevin and Mike kind of go over their thoughts from the infrastructure side, kind of where they see some of those needs being, and then we'll shut up and let you guys have the floor and kind of carry it from there. But so with that, Kevin, Mike, you all want to just kind of give them an overview of.
Can I ask a question before
Sure.
we get into that? I'm assuming that you're gonna charge us for what all this good stuff you're doing.
No,
That was it. That was in their proposal, and that will be.
And that is payable out of the funds received.
Yeah.
Will
So,
that be a percentage of the total?
roughly, yes.
And roughly that percentage is
You know, I'm already under contract. I didn't think I brought that.
60,000?
Yeah, I think that's right.
50,
60.
60, okay.
And that's, and you know, the way we have worked this is, yes, obviously we're charging, they've been very clear that, they being treasury, that administrative costs, because they realize, as David mentioned, I mean, while some communities may have, the capacity to handle these, you know, putting this much money into the entire country, there's gonna need to be systems out there.
Yeah.
And so administrative costs are definitely an eligible expense, both with the direct allocation and with TDEC. So the way we have structured things is we kind of got the ball rolling. That's one of the requirements of federal funding is that it had to be a procurement process for professional services, for administrative and engineering services. The city went through that process. Mike and myself, we submitted our qualifications, you all approved those. You approved our contract for the direct allocation of funding. And so it's kind of just building, a little bit. So right now we know about the direct allocation, as we know more about the TDEC allocation and what that's gonna involve, and the potential county funding. And, you know, then we can simply amend what we've already started. We don't have to go through the process all over, if that makes sense.
It does, and that, you know, this is one of those things where, particularly with small cities, you know, we don't have the staffing to do that, and you know, $60,000 in this case sounds like a lot of money, and it is. But if you hired an employee and you paid that person benefits, you know, we're getting a whole firm. So I promise you, we'll get that much work out of Evan and more. So
And all I was trying to do was I've got me a running tally up here, is to plug in a number
Right.
to see how much is left.
Yep, absolutely.
we'll make him earn every penny of that. So.
We will be here.
Thank you.
So, yeah, like I said, with that, Kevin, Mike, just kind of take a minute, talk about your thoughts on some of our pressing infrastructure needs within the scorecard, where you're thinking on that after your visit.
So as David said, I'm not going to lie, we could use this money in every direction our city extends. I've been looking at this, you know, off and on ever since they announced this. Sort of what I done is, and just to give you an idea, when me and Michael went out and rode around and looked at some things, what I was really looking at is the things that, you know, we could fix, that is, you know, sort of, I'm not going to say problematic, but things that I might have to come back to you and put in a 5-year plan or something like that. Just and not really what you say big ticket items, but they are big ticket items, you know. But what I tried to really do is look at the areas that where it was, like for example, pump station number 1. We've actually got 3 motors in that pump station. 2 of the 3's been updated, but that pump station in particular services all of our town. If one of those pumps goes down, one pump can't carry it. So, and then I just went around and looked at like other pump stations and stuff that, you know, that's old, obsolete, just needed some stuff updated on them, you know, electrical or pumps and stuff like that. Even going back and looking, there's a lot of areas, and I don't know the exact year, y'all, when this was done, but we've done a lot of cured in place lines. We've sort of gotten away from that, and we've not been doing a whole lot of it. Thought about even using some of this funding for that, to sort of get us back up and get those lines in our sewer areas that's, you know, 70 and 80 years old, to try to get us another 70 years out of them. A lot of the places that I looked at is I wanted to see what's been done in the roadways underneath state right-of-ways, to where we know that it's going to be very unlikely that they're ever going to let us go in there and replace that without just completely relocating it. So we've got a lot of I&I that I think we could do with this money. We've got a few pumps around the plants that could be updated that's, just been in since the 80s that we need to, look at replacing. Another thing sort of more on the water side that I looked at, our Ladd Landing and Morrison Hill tanks, both of those are approaching the time to be refurbished. We're around the 20-year mark on them. Been in some conversation with various tank companies, but they say that we're going to have to do those sometime in the very near future, and that's on the upwards of, just ballpark, maybe $40,000-$50,000 a piece. Another thing that I think that could be real beneficial to us is putting some more, replacing some of our old water valves in our system that just to allow us to isolate those areas in the water leaks when we have those water leaks, to where we don't have so many customers without. This is one of those things we can spend as much or as little as we want. I'm not going to lie. A lot of our valves are old. They don't hold. That's an unlimited amount there. That's on y'all. Another thing that we sort of talked about some is our water meters. We're on our water meters now, going on into the I think the 11th or 12th year of when we done that total meter replacement. We need to start looking at getting into the next phase of that, so that we don't have that one big project cost like we did in the first one of having a total system change out. And of course, as we all know also, the 3rd Street water line, just the nemesis in our side. There's something else that we could do, but it goes back to something that I think Evan spoke about, and Mayor, that you even spoke about. What's the cost of material on this? What's it going to be to get a contractor? So I've not got that, just to tell y'all all. I don't really have that 3rd Street water line high up on my list or on my list of priorities, but it is. But for me, I think, and this is only my opinion, y'all have the final say, but I'm sort of looking at what can we do and get our money, and we're not having to wait on somebody else. The meters, we can do those in-house. Valve replacements, we can do in-house. I'm just thinking, what can we take our money and spend it on and get what we need right now, and not have to, for me, to have to come back to y'all in a year or two and say, hey, I need to replace this pump or whatever, But like I say, it's all on y'all. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions, give you anything I can. But like I say, and I think that's what me and Michael had talked about. I said, Michael, this line has really been a problem for us, but at the end of the day, even with the amounts of money we get and due to the prices and the shortages that we got, really and truly, how could we replace that whole line, I guess is what I'm saying, with these amounts.
And Kevin raises, just jump in real quick. Kevin raises a good point. As we start thinking about this, looking at what can we do in-house as opposed to what are we going to have to contract out, because contract labor is going to be very, very precious over the next few years.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say this also. And me and Mr. Mickey Barger had this discussion back some time ago. What you're going to get into is there's not a whole lot of licensed and bonded contracts of what the state and the federal government wants you to meet. So that's going to play into factor of how quick you can get this. Can you get this started by 24 or 25 and have it done by 26? So like I say, sort of just like I said, me and Michael, we just sort of rode through and we looked at the stuff, y'all, that we knew we could get done and we would not have no problem. And then, what was left over, then we could go on in another direction, even use it if we had X amount of dollars left, and use it toward that 3rd Street line or whatever we needed to do, or even any other line.
Well, we've got till November to get the application in for it, correct?
Yes, on the TDEC side of things, that's correct.
But the county, that would include the county money, correct?
Absolutely.
So that means everything we'd have to do, we'd have to have it decided in place by November. Okay. All right.
And one, and Mike, I'll let you jump in a minute. I'd be interested to get your perspective on our system based on what you've seen. But one thing, and Evan, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but in terms of the TDEC money, they want, is it still, their priority still having that money to address existing infrastructure as opposed to new installations?
So there, yeah, the TDEC money is, the intent of the TDEC money is to improve systems, as Dave said, not necessarily to extend lines to service new customers. And that doesn't mean that you can't. That's why they have the scorecard in place, and they're requiring you to address the scorecard first and foremost. And then if you take care of what they feel of what's been flagged on the scorecard, if you take care of all those things and you still got money, yep, then you can move on to extending lines to, other existing. You can't extend lines with TDEC money on speculative basis. We're going to extend it to this property that we hope we're going to be able to draw a development or something into. Can't do that with the funds, the TDEC funds. But you could if there was a neighborhood or a community that was without water or wastewater, you could extend lines for those purposes under their eligibility.
So like on the Longville Road, if we wanted to grow our growth out there, we already know the need for it there. So we would be able to do that, pump station stuff to take on Longville Road.
Tell me a little bit about that situation.
Let me interrupt you if it's okay, Randy. That's an area, Evan, what Randy's asking is, it's already existing. It already has homes there, so it's not like it would be waiting on a developer to develop that 150 acre tract.
That's correct. If there happens to be a property in between a point A and a point B, and, no problem at all with that.
After the red flags
After
are
the red
met.
flags. Now,
Now,
the
the
other
direct
side of
appropriation.
that, the other side of that is, if you are wrapped with TDEC addressing red flag issues, that doesn't preclude you with your direct allocation of city money from doing extensions. That can be done. They still, and this kind of opened up even a little more, because even under the water wastewater with direct allocation, there still were eligibility requirements of, you couldn't do speculative. You could extend lines, but not on a speculative basis. With the revenue loss, more than likely you can do a little bit more of those things. Kevin, you mentioned tank refurbishment. Originally, tank refurbishment wasn't going to be eligible either TDEC or direct allocation, but I think with the revenue loss, there may be that potential of use of the funds. Because they did have some strings tied to the even the direct allocation of water wastewater money. They basically, with the water wastewater money, with direct allocation, they are requiring communities to follow the state revolving fund eligibility criteria. And under SRF for short, you can't do extensions to speculative properties. You can't do maintenance, which is refurbishment of tanks. So there's some other standards we've got to take into consideration with all these.
What if an adjacent utility that is not ours needs funds to serve their customers, as in new sewer line, new water line, because they don't serve sewer currently?
So an adjacent utility, so the service would not be provided by the city of Kingston.
They would be, the adjacent utility would be a wholesale customer.
We would treat the sewer that they collect. We would provide the water that they sell, and again, this would be a collaborative project between two utilities.
And
So.
it would probably be collaborative with the county as well. So I'm just
Sure,
making sure.
that's definitely a collaborative effort. you know, whether it be TDEC money or whether it be direct allocation of money. One of the other things that, you know, as part of our role involved is if you all are working with your direct allocation, and quite frankly, TDEC ultimately, there is a requirement when you have situations like that, that there be a subrecipient agreement. In other words, you're, you know, if you're providing something that you're ultimately turning over to someone else, there has to be a legal subrecipient agreement in place.
What, since we are red flags for our aging water lines, if we're not replacing many water lines, are they going to, be less apt to fund it?
So,
And if, before you answer that, if
Yep.
I could jump in and just a reminder, you know, if you're looking at $1.9 million in TDEC money, it's only going to go so far. We're not going to be able to replace a lot.
right.
So if we were to use that, I mean, good grief, we've used $500,000 before just to cure in place lines, and probably didn't do
Right.
that many.
Right.
So, you know, if we used all that money, even if something collaborative or speculative didn't fit within that, or those funds ran out, that now that this lost revenue, that direct appropriation money is still on the table. So that's a good thing. That
The asset management plan that was red flagged, is that something we just do in-house that's really, or is that something we have to have another company come in to do?
we're,
Yeah,
I'll let you two touch on.
I'll touch briefly at least on one thing, and then I'll let Mike. You know, the one thing that is still yet to be in place is TAUD and TDEC are working on kind of a template model of what the minimum requirements they feel need to be met for an asset management plan. So at some point, we will have some guidance to say, okay, boom, this is what you all are gonna have to follow in order to check that
Okay.
box. I'll let Mike talk to the.
No, you're right, Patty. I mean, there's several elements to the asset management plan, again, of which you already have in place. For example, mapping,
Okay.
a hydraulic model. Those are two big elements of an asset management plan that you want. Always want to have a good map and kind of understand how your holistic system operates. So those are big. So really, when you look at what you have and
You
what
just put it all together.
yeah, just compiling it all together, looking just to make sure you've covered all your bases relative to every element within your system. How are you planning for future replacements, upgrades, things of that nature, and what are you doing with those assets today, and how you intend to handle and manage those in the future for sustainability and such. So a lot of it for you all, I think, is just going to kind of be bringing it together, and then looking at the structured or template that TAUD and TDEC puts together, and how all those pieces fit in place.
Mike, while you have a hot mic and not
Yeah.
wanting you to feel ignored down there,
Nope, you're good.
would love to get have you just kind of give us your outside looking in
Sure.
perspective of how do you see our system now that you've been able to take a look?
Yeah,
And
definitely. Kevin and I, we had an opportunity to drive around one afternoon and go look at your water and wastewater plant, drove all over your water system, drove to your tanks, to your pump stations. Like everybody else, there's obvious needs for replacement. Again, part of the asset management, quite frankly, and the modernization. I mean, to use that term to sort of bring things up to where they've been in place for 20, 30 years. In some cases, Kevin alluded to some pumps 40 years old, that there's some modernization opportunities to just bring you up to date on some things. So your plants, your wastewater plant, 2015, I think, is when that was last expanded. Pretty darn good shape.
I think we're only like 20% capacity.
Yeah,
at this
yeah,
point or something.
exactly. So it's in good shape. Your water plant, there's some needs there. There's a big there's a big backwash pump that probably needs to be replaced. It's got some age. It's got some inaccessible piping that needs to be brought up to where at floor level where you can access it and not have to go into a clear well where your water's stored, your treated water, to access that piping. So again, there's some needs. There's, you know, some of your pump stations, the electrical could be updated just because of the age in the new technologies that are available. So again, there's definitely, you know, collectively a lot of things that could be done. You know, what I'm looking forward to doing is starting, you know, put a price tag to some of these things. You know, what are we talking in terms of dollars? And, you know, as Kevin alluded to, what can you do in-house effectively, and then what can you do, what has to be done externally from a contractual standpoint, and you know, coming up with those numbers, because we've talked about that there's going to be some limiting factors with the contractors that are going to be available to do the work. I mean, they're going to be, at some point, get a little bit overwhelmed, I think, as far as their availability on projects and getting things done. So we need to be looking at that timing-wise on when to get things. If there's projects that have to be competitively bid, when do we need to get those out on the street and make sure we can meet these deadlines? I mean, that is, while it seems like a lot of time right now, it's not a lot of time right now. So, I mean, it'll go by relatively quickly. So that's certainly a concern that I've got, because you know, Evan and I are both working with a lot of different communities, so we're seeing all the different work that they're proposing to do, and there's a lot of stuff that's going to be coming out. So, but again, that would be the next big step for us to help you all, is to come up with that pricing. Kevin's already been doing some of that. He's got some pricing already in place on replacing some pumps and such. So again, pulling all those collectively together in some type of priority list, if you will, that maybe you just use that sort of as a guideline to pick and choose what are those top projects that you want to try to target.
And I'm gonna, you guys have sit here and listened to us talk, and I want you guys to have a chance to ask them questions, to give your thoughts. So I'm gonna shut up real quick in just a second, believe it or not. But just wanted to point out, as we start looking not only at utility but across the board with the direct allocation funding, you know, we have a running 5-year capital plan, which you're getting ready to get. We just finished updating that. You're going to be getting a copy of that soon to see. But just to give you an example, and you know, we put in needs in here that we know aren't always going to get met. We're not going to be able to meet them, but we try to do what we can. You know, for example, over the next 5 years, citywide, we have $4 million in potential capital projects in here. So there's plenty of stuff to spend the money on, but it's not like we're going to be just starting from scratch saying, gosh, what do we need? What are, you know, we have from each department a 5-year look at what they see their needs. So you'll have that at your disposal too, to help you as you start identifying some potential uses for this funding. And with that, I'm going to turn on my time. So.
Okay. And before we start questions, I would like to take about a 10-minute recess. Let everyone have a restroom break, because I know everybody's been up here writing down questions and stuff, so it may go a little longer. So everybody come back in 10 minutes, and we'll resume this.
And I assume you guys know, I don't know if you do or not, but you're also getting fed today. So I don't know what's on the recipe, but Kelly's been working hard on something, so I know she'll have something good for you whenever you're ready for that.
She's been cooking all day.
She has.
Since about 11.
All right, we'll take 10 minutes. Everybody's got 10-minute questions, so if we can start now, we'll be here for an hour. Everybody's got to go to the bathroom.
So many moving parts. You know, and that's one thing that I think, you know, some places were 6 months ago on the team, they played last night, and the starting goalie had his wisdom teeth taken out.
Oh.
The second string goalie got red flagged a couple games back, so he couldn't play. So they had no goalie. So my son Carter got put in as goalie. He started, but never played it in his life.
Seriously?
Yeah. So he was, maybe when he was, just little, but so he was a nervous wreck. But
Oh my gosh.
they didn't have anybody else to do it. Everybody else they needed in other places. So they won 5-0.
Oh my
He
gosh.
made 5 stops, and it was a clean sheet, so.
Oh
So
my
he had
goodness,
faced
man.
5 saves, so he said
Wow.
afterwards, he said, oh, one and done.
One and done.
I retired as goalie, so, I'm sure he'd play again if needed, but he was nervous, but he did.
That is tough, yes.
So,
Yeah.
it was neat for him because all the crowd there, everybody knew the situation that he had never, so everybody was nervous.
Oh my gosh.
So every time he would stop one, the whole place would just erupt.
Yes, oh, I bet.
As soon as the game was over, the whole team just ran toward him.
Oh,
So
my.
they just congratulating him and all that. So it was a
What
big
a-
night for him, but.
That's fantastic, man. That is great.
Now, which high school? Okay. Okay. Now, do they play exclusively private schools, or do they play mixed?
Oh, really? Oh, really? Oh, wow. Yeah. So you are, oh, gosh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he doesn't even know
They
he's
play,
saying.
doing that now, or right, we're talking about, his son plays soccer at Kingsworth, we're talking about private schools and public schools playing each other more now. Is it? We don't have that here in East Tennessee, Knoxville area, but.
See anybody ever told you to do about
Sits in
that?
a lab.
Bank account looks like this.
Is Congress still talking about doing away and bring the money back and do something else with it?
Well, that was kind of a red flag, not on his,
Okay.
could you imagine?
Oh, my goodness.
Be careful, I couldn't, but, you gotta think about who you're talking about. Congress,
Worse,
doesn't put
try to
surprise
go
you.
sleep at
No,
night,
no,
all of a
it's-
sudden your brain's
Well, but these people have already spent money, I know the county here has already spent money.
Oh. Yeah, yeah,
He
focus.
does it out of
Oh, really? I've not heard that.
joking, she really did cook.
Huh?
I said, I was just joking, she really
Yeah,
did cook.
well, she's good.
I'm not afraid to eat.
If y'all are in the need of caffeine, she has that Keurig. Kelly has one. That's a great substitute for energy drink.
I'm good for about 1 cup a day.
Oh, really?
That's really good.
Is that good?
Yeah, it really is good. The chili's
We better
fantastic.
go back and
Well,
get
if I
some.
sit around for these sports, little something, God, I will. I have to go breakfast.
Yeah, I didn't have breakfast either.
Now we know Kelly can cook, right? Are you still enjoying retirement?
Oh, yeah, I am now, a whole lot better than I did.
You got softball, baseball season now.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're
so
welcome.
much. The secret's
Dog
out.
food every
We know
day.
you can cook.
What do you do with baseball programs?
I'm a national director for Dixie Youth Baseball,
Are you really?
then I'm a high school umpire for softball, baseball.
So he's retired from work, so he can have time. to
Yeah.
rest it.
Good friend that oversaw the, one of the leagues in Nashville, it's like a full-time job,
Yeah.
full-time job. Yeah, that becomes a challenge.
Yeah, Saturday I've got a clinic that I'm doing for the local umpire group, so
Oh, I
season.
saw all the kids, all the baseball kids are like, oh, we'll be at a tournament.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have a particular region, is it pretty much local, this region?
Local. Do, Anderson County, Roane County, Morgan County, Scott County, some Cleveland County, but I'm so old and gray-headed, I try to stay close. I've got,
That's a lot of territory, actually.
well, they've got the umpires that are, kind of live in different areas, so we don't lock across. So I'll stay Rockwood, Harriman, Kingston, Midway.
Yep.
Got one tonight in Norwood, had one last night in Kingston, had one Tuesday night in Midway.
excellent. Really, really good. Yeah.
Kelly, you make the chili.
It's all delicious, Kelly, thank you.
It's really good.
I don't know, it looked good. I got a half a spoonful.
Evan, you not gonna eat?
No, I had breakfast about half an hour before I rolled in. Just life on the road. Coming out of Nashville this morning. I'm good right now, I appreciate it.
Hey, David, I didn't look, is that, T-Dot meeting, is it, with other cities as well?
Yeah, it's being put on, or it's being organized by our RPO, which is
Oh, okay.
the districts.
Yeah.
So it's everybody, we're in the south RPO, I guess.
South.
Yeah, we're the bottom of the
So
barrel.
Good, hot.
Yeah, it's got a little spice to it.
I mean, eat hot, it's spicy.
What's
Mhm.
spicy?
Was it? It's got a hot piece of chicken.
did you do a bracket this year?
I really not bothered about it.
Yeah, me too. Mine was all.
Especially after last night.
Team I had winning got beat last night. And the team I had them playing got beat
Last night.
Saturday night.
Yeah, my final four is way gone. So whatever points I have now are all I'm getting. Part of it bragging about how well it is to get this bracket to us. Yeah, we do like 6 of them, so. Eventually, you're gonna get what right.
You increase your odds the more you do.
Our Lee Arsenal still a lot of SEC teams. Texas A&M is in the NIT.
Wait, Arkansas won last night, didn't
Yeah, they beat
Yeah,
Kentucky.
so-
It's like they're still alive, one of them still alive.
Big Gonzaga, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, with the Arizona and Gonzaga being gone, that's,
I get frustrated with Tennessee sports, you never meet the potential.
we did win the SEC championship, which we haven't done
Yeah, that's.
since 1979, so. Baseball, we're a baseball school.
Oh, you see who's throwing out the first pitch tonight, Ole Miss?
They're Arkansas fun.
Keepin's throwing out the first pitch tonight.
That one pitcher the other night hitting that, the ump in the face mask, I just saw his life flash before his eyes. 103 pitch to the face mask. How'd that feel? Yeah.